Welcome, folks, one and all, to Let's Play Eye of the Beholder, a game released for the PC in 1991. It was developed by Westwood Associates and published by SSI, and is a role-playing game that uses the advanced Dungeons & Dragons rule set, much like Baldur's Gate. Eye of the Beholder in many ways, and its sequel, could be stated to be the preceding games leading up to Lands of Lore itself. As between Eye of the Beholder 2 and 3, Westwood and SSI had disagreements as to how the game would be made, Eye of the Beholder 3 that is, and then Westwood decided to part ways with SSI and use the engine that they've been using on Eye of the Beholder 1 and 2 and developing to make Lands of Lore. Indeed, in this game, but much more in the sequel, there are the telltale signs of the game that Lands of Lore would be. Eye of the Beholder is a game that I actually haven't really played whatsoever. The few times I've ever tried to play it, I've only really gone a small way into maybe the first 5 or 6 minutes before stopping. So Eye of the Beholder is going to be a very, very new experience for me in a lot of ways. I am going to not know the solution to puzzles, and I am going to get the names of monsters and enemies wrong, and I'll have to look them up between videos, because sometimes in these older games the artistic representation of certain enemies can be a little vague in comparison to other foes, and sometimes my memory of D&D monsters will just fail me and I'll have to look it up later. Another thing to note about Eye of the Beholder is there is only one save slot. There is only one. You can save at any time, which is something I initially thought you couldn't. I thought you could only save during resting. You could save at any time during the game, but you can't save multiple slots. You only have one, which brings about the next issue, which is that I've already recorded this introduction, but it went completely out of sync. This and the character generation went completely out of sync. And so I'm re-recording it now, and with the way that character generation works, it's going to be very difficult for me to roll the stats that my party actually had. I do have them all written down, and so I shall recreate the stats that I eventually got, because there is actually a modify ability. Because if you don't want to roll your stats in this game, you can just decide what they're going to be. And so, in a moment we're going to go and start a new party, but not start a new party, as I'm going to show you exactly what party I ended up settling on. It may not be a very powerful party, but it is the party that I've decided to go with. And so, without further ado, let us head into the world of Eye of the Beholder. A world which has a pretty cut-and-paste plot. The plot is very, very bare bones. Pretty much, there is evil under the city of Waterdeep. You must go and investigate. And then they went and investigated. But a dark and sinister force has been watching this, and saw their heroes descend, and now they are trapped. The only hope they have is to press onward, and hopefully find a way for them to get out and deal with the problem simultaneously. I don't think the plot is going to be referenced many times whatsoever. It does seem very throwaway. They could have just gone, "Hey, adventure!" and people would have been fine with that. It was back in the day with D&D games where sometimes the plot was very thin on the ground indeed. Other ones, it was very, very rich. I mean, we're looking at the games like Straht's Possession and all that, and that series of games. They have some pretty decent plots. And so, let us move on into the Start Party screen. And if you give me just one moment, we will be there. And here we are on the character generation screen. You'll notice that there's music at this point where there hasn't been music in the actual main menu. That's because there are very few music tracks in the game. You've actually now heard 3 of the 4 of them, this one being the 3rd. Let's go on to the character generation itself. Although your party can be a maximum of 6, you only get to create 4 of these party members. Party members that can be imported from one Eye of the Beholder game to another. It's perfectly possible for you to have a party you make here and take them all the way through the Eye of the Beholder trilogy. If we do that, remains to be seen. let's make our first member, shall we? We have a selection of a numerous amount of races, and both genders on all of them to pick from: human, elf, half-elf, dwarf, gnome, and halfling. And the first person that I wanted to make was a human female, a paladin. Picking a paladin means that you cannot have any evil members of your party, but I think it's worth it, as paladins gain the ability to cast spells a lot later. It's not in this game, I don't think. They're more of an investment in the future, as in Eye of the Beholder 2, if I play with this party, the paladin will be able to cast spells then. They also have a constant aura of protection from evil, which makes it a little more difficult for evil enemies to attack and hurt the party. And one final thing as well, is I'm pretty sure they're completely immune to disease. We can only select lawful good as an alignment, and I picked, if memory serves, this portrait. And now this is the point where you could re-roll your stats, where you just keep rolling to see what actual number you get. Hit points is also something here that can be rolled randomly, but I will modify them because I will let you know as to what I actually ended up getting. The first thing we ended up getting is that we got a quite high strength roll. We got strength 18/77, which is a quite high amount of strength. It's not the highest, that would be 18/00. There we go. Intelligence we got 11. Wisdom we got 13. Dexterity we got 16, which was pretty impressive, and lowers your armor class. In Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the lower your armor class is, the better. A Dex 10 person with no armor starts with a base armor class of 10. Con was 15, and the charisma on a paladin is either 17 or 18. It never deviates from those two. We got 17. We also got a pretty high amount of hit points. We got 23 hit points. And with OK, we can then keep these stats, which are what I rolled, and we will pick the name. This character is called Valendra. A point to make about the two rows here, the front and the back row. Back row characters cannot attack in melee, so that is where you want to put people who either are going to attack at range or your spellcasters. That said, the clerics are able to use maces and various other weapons, but it's not recommended you put them at the front. The next character that I made was a male gnome. A male gnome thief. May not be the most optimal race for a thief, but I decided on that. And chaotic neutral. You'll note that there is no choice for an evil alignment here. If we didn't have a paladin, there would be a choice for an evil alignment. Let's pick the portrait. I'm pretty sure I selected this one here. And then we'll go to replicating the stats that I had. Sandstar's strength is unchanged here at 15, but his intelligence is 15 as well. His wisdom is slightly higher at 16, and dexterity was a exceptionally impressive 18, which reduced his armor class all the way down to 6. Constitution was lower at 14, and charisma was even lower still at 12. And the hit points were quite a bit lower than this number, that was 16. You'll also notice that as a thief he is level 4 as opposed to Valendra's level 3. This was back in the time when levels were... I think level boundaries were quite a bit different. If you, say, put a ranger in the team, they would level up quite a bit slower than a fighter would. And so, we get to keep this, and this gnome is called Sandstar. And now we go on to the back line of characters, where I'd wanted to make a dwarven mage. But it's not possible to make a dwarven mage, I discovered at this point, much to my sadness, so I made a human male mage instead. There we go. And I believe he was lawful neutral. And I'm pretty sure I know exactly which, I used this portrait here. And then we got to his stats. While I was primarily looking for intelligence and wisdom, inadvertently, Rune ended up having 17 strength that I didn't even notice until looking back here. He had 18 intelligence, which is pretty good, and 15 wisdom, but his dexterity left a lot to be desired at 12, and his con and charisma are both 10. More worryingly, his hit points were a resounding 7. Yeah, Rune is a little fragile for being so strong. Strength is something he's not really going to need, it's the intelligence that's the most important there. And indeed I've given away his name is Rune. And the last character that I made, we need a cleric, and I kept calling clerics priests. I think that might be an even earlier version of Dungeons & Dragons that I might be referencing there. It is a female half-elf that we're making here, and you can see the massive amount of multiclassing that is possible. Multiclassing is not something any of these party members is going to do, mainly because it really slows down your experience gain. It's going to be a cleric, and she is going to be chaotic good. And the portrait I'm going to use for this character, as memory serves, is this one. The stats that she has are not as dramatic as many of the others. Strength, however, is at 8, and intelligence remains unchanged there at 15. Wisdom here is at 18, which was very good, and dexterity at 15, which lowered her armor class a little. Con is actually lower here at 10, and charisma is at 12, and the starting hit points, however, was a very impressive 16. Compared to Rune, that's very good. And her name was Lilantha. The reason why I knew pretty much what I was going for here was because I'd thought in advance as to what the characters were going to be, and also the reason why they all travel together. Valendra and Lilantha are actually half-sisters in this party, with them both sharing a human mother, but Lilantha having an elven father. And so they are naturally sisters and travel together. I was about to say naturally friends. That's not always the case with sisters, but they are good friends, and so travel together in adventure. Rune is a long-time friend of the sisters, and so when the threat to Waterdeep was clear and they needed someone to assist them in their quest, whatever it was going to be, Rune readily offered his services. As for Sandstar the gnome, nobody knew him beforehand. He offered his services as a locksmith, and nobody was quite sure why he decided to come along, although Valendra noticed nothing exceptionally evil or suspicious about him. The theory amongst the group is that Sandstar's in it for the fame and the gold. I'm about to say for the Thane. Maybe he does serve a Thane, who knows, but he's in it for the fame and the gold. And is a little surly and ill-tempered, but he seemed, and he proved as he was demonstrating his ability as a locksmith, that he was pretty capable at it. So the party became as it is now, and if I were to press play, we would go to the actual main game itself. I'm not going to be doing that though for a number of reasons, namely because I don't know what pressing play will do for the save slot that I currently have that I've recorded in advance. I don't want to remake the party and then have to redo all of the progress in the game that I've previously done. So the video is going to end on this screen. Another thing to mention is that in between this and the game itself, I will be memorizing and praying for spells with the party. Rune memorizes spells, whereas Lilantha prays for them. But it's both the same mechanic as they pick which spells they're going to learn, and then rest makes them memorize them. Valendra, in theory, can do that. She can pray for spells, but she's not a high enough level yet. Valendra needs to get to level 9, if memory serves, for that to be a possibility. Sandstar is never going to know magic, so that's not a problem. And so, one more thing before we do go. Originally I said that I thought there is only one save slot, that is true, but I thought that you'd only save when you rest. Turns out that that was completely wrong, and you can save at any point. But you do only have one save slot. And so, when we come back, folks, we shall be by the cave-in in the sewers of Waterdeep, with our party rested and spells memorized, ready to press on deeper into the depths. And so, I'll catch you next time, folks. And I'll see you then. Later.